Okay, calm down.
And something that you are very articulate about, or I would say very nuanced about, is the way that class and racism intersect. And a lot of people, you of course don't dismiss the role of racism. I mean, far from it. But you also don't dismiss the role of class. And I think there's a tendency, a lot of people like to say that the only reason Trump wins is because of sexism and racism. That's a bit challenged, I would say. Not that people can't internalize white supremacy or sexism, but what do you think happened? Why? How does someone like Trump seduce people? And is it all just racism and misogyny, or and sexism, or what else do you think is there?
Hmm That's a wonderful question, though, and I think it's very important that we situate ourselves intellectually in traditions that understand the relation of empire and class and race and gender and even region and sexual orientation. Uh, I think of somebody like the great Gerald Horne. I think he's one of the towering figures of our day, and he always looks at the world through the lens of the ways in which white supremacy and male supremacy have been shot through predatory capitalist systems of production, but always grounded in empire building or resistance to empire. And therefore, one of the reasons why I spend as much time with the younger generation, with Brother Coates, I have great respect for Brother Coates, in terms of him raising his voice and so forth, especially now on the Palestinian issue. That's a beautiful thing in so many ways. But when you talk about race, or when you talk about white supremacist practices and ideologies, not connected or grounded in imperial and predatory capitalist practices, you end up fetishizing racism, and you make it as if it has magical powers, as opposed to something that can be wrestled with in light of the role and function it plays in a capitalist world and in an imperial world in which the end and aim is short-term gain, which is financial. The end and aim is status, too. The end and aim is forms of power that will degrade and demean people. So you got exploitation, you got domination, and you got degradation. That's just Malcolm X's language. Not just, that's Malcolm's language. And that's a tradition that needs to be accented if we're going to ever have the kind of truth telling and the forms of solidarity required to change it. Because you see, if you view racism as just some isolated thing that has magical powers, you're going to end up an Afro pessimist that thinks that
Hmm.
somehow this is an ontological condition. This is primordial. It will never, ever, ever, ever change. So all we can do is moan and be bystanders and be spectators. No, we got to be participants. We got to be interveners. And we have to understand history is something, no matter how low and whatever nadir history reaches, it can still be changed and transformed. And the people say, was that naive? No, that's naive. I'm not an optimist at all. You and I have talked about the blues on many occasions on your show and others. And I'm a blues man. I come from a blues people. And the blues ain't got nothing to do with optimism whatsoever. But it is an enactment of hope. And hope is a verb as well as a virtue. In motion, to stay in movement.
That's interesting. You just made me think of something, and I'm literally just thinking of it. And the parallels, I don't want to go too far in it, but there is something to the way that Zionism requires anti-Semitism to function. And there's not a real parallel with, well, maybe there is with Afro-pessimism, and how they're in certain contexts, racism is almost, I don't want to say incentivized, but it's required for a certain ideology. I'm just thinking of that in real time. I don't have anything very nuanced
No, but
to say about it, but
we can think about
you
it
just
in
made
this
me
way
think of
that
that. Yeah.
there's a real sense in which the golden calf of European modernity was nationalism.
Right.
And it's something that convinced people they should live and die for it. That democratic practices themselves come through the nutshell of the nation state that has a monopoly on violence, a monopoly on institutions of public administration. And Zionism is a particular kind of nationalism of a hated and terrorized and traumatized peoples in a Jew hating Europe, and they're looking for a way out, and they're jumping out of the burning buildings of Jew-hating Europe, but taking with them versions of European ideology tied to nation building and nation states as the only thing that will protect them, and they land on people who are already there, and then they start lying. There's no people here. We're not involved in any expulsions when there's 750,000 there. And Einstein and Judah Magnus and Ahakaham and others saying we got to coexist with these Arab brothers and sisters, and Jabotinsky and others saying no, we got to dominate them and we got to annihilate them. And that's where Netanyahu comes from, of course. His father, one of the assistants of Jabotinsky. And so we lost that battle in that context in terms of trying to provide ways in which any people terrorize and traumatize. And coming out of 50 million dead in World War II, and 6 million Jews and millions of communists and socialists and gays and others, that's a level of human barbarity we don't have a language for. Thank God for Paul Celan. Thank God for, for, for other poets trying to make sense of it all. But where are we now? Well, now we got the American Empire. Oh my God.
I want to make sure people don't misunderstand, because I was just thinking now in my head of Marcus Garvey and the KKK, right? Collaborating in a way that Zionists and Nazis collaborated. But the big difference, of course, is that I want to be very clear: Black separatists did not dominate and colonize and ethnically cleanse another people. So I want to be very clear about the limits to the parallel.
And Garvey, of course, it was strategic. He was meeting with the Klan to let them know he was going to organize in the South, and if they attacked Black people, he was going to attack back. So it was just a matter of saying, look, we here to stay, and we're going to have some agreement, or we're going to have a civil war down here. But he still got in trouble with Du Bois and others. Deeply upset when he brought the Klan there, and so definitely. But it's also true, my dear sister, that when Black people went to Liberia, you had another settler colonial situation, just like Australia, Canada, just like the United States, just like Israel. I mean, settler colonial regimes, cut across different colors and regions and continents. You see, you subordinate indigenous peoples, you degrade indigenous peoples. You act as if nothing was there before you arrived, and think that lo and behold, history will not come get you. The chickens won't come home to roost. Sooner you won't reap what you sow. And of course, we're experiencing a chickens come home to roost moment in the American empire. It's just that we have to fight because there's so many precious folk, especially poor and working people of all colors, who will disproportionately suffer. And to see the 1% and to see the billionaires and the multi-billionaires just break dancing to the White House, break dancing in Florida, break dancing to the bank. For those of us who come out of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and the Black freedom fighters of the 60s, it boils our blood. We just have to make sure we keep love at the center of it. We can't be obsessed with hating folk. We got to love the people who are being hated and be in solidarity with people who are being hated, whoever they are, wherever they are.
I realized that I know nothing. I'm just going to totally admit it. I've never studied about Liberia. So I don't know anything about it. But what you've just described to me sounds like it's, another example of multicultural, maybe militarism, multicultural settler colonialism.
Wonderful. There's something. Well, you can imagine just Liberia, liberty.
Yeah, exactly.
Monroe, named after James Monroe. You say, oh, come on now,
Yeah.
How you gonna treat the precious indigenous folk in that part of Africa as you reshape it? And again, the Black folk who were going, they were running from,
of course,
New World barbarity, just like Jews coming to, could have been Uganda, could have been Central America, could have been the Middle East. Jewish brothers and sisters and siblings, they were trying to get out some of the most barbaric conditions conceivable. But we have to respect people enough to stay in contact with their humanity, to make them responsible and answerable for their actions. And that's true for their communities, that's true for their nation states, that's true for neo-colonial elites in Africa and Asia that are still collaborating with various imperial elites in Paris and London and the United States. And that's true on the block, it's true on the corner, it's true in our neighborhoods, that we all have to take responsibility. But we have to have a moral and a spiritual compass, so we're not on anybody's plantation, though, Sister Kid. And that's always a problem.